Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 26th. Quite an exciting day. The continuation from Friday was simply selling, and we hit the 23%. Started to go below it, which was interesting given that on the daily here we could see that the MBI readings, the magenta was over, yellow is still declining, so it's expressing some weakness, but the white had already dipped down below. So that creates a mixed bag kind of confluence, and then once we hit that 23, it started fighting back, and then once it got back, institutional investors obviously liked that area and bought back up significantly on that. Some of that may have been short covering from the original signals as well, but 23% is usually a popular spot. A close below the 23% would have been serious. That would have been a relatively quick call to the 0%. And so again, it becomes fairly straightforward because you have the 38% right up here above at 42.98 and the 23 obviously at 42.20. So that becomes the range above that 38. Clearly becomes more long interested, but certainly I would be looking for a pivot up of that magenta for it to be something that's more sustainable. Are there plenty of headwinds? Sure, but even within any kind of bear dip like you see, there's always these positive moves that go within down moves like that, and that's just a matter of rotations as well as back and forth. You can see it was clearer on the NASDAQ here with the rise of the magenta clearly above yellow and spiking upwards. So the NASDAQ in this case turned around and obviously had the news on Twitter and some of those things. So there's some excitement around a lot of that, and it certainly was encouraging. But easier even with the 23%, 13,491. Staying above that is definitely on the more bullish side, particularly with the crossover. The question then becomes, how much momentum do you get from that? And at any point do you peak and come back lower? This is pretty extreme from a dip standpoint, so I think that it's probably going to have a little more to that. We've talked about the disaster the Eurozone is since it's been in the mid-120 range, and that was way outside of reasonability given how bad things are for the ECB. But it's even worse than that because it's like we saw last week that I mentioned about the Bank of Japan asking for intervention by the Fed to help support the yen, and this gets into some of that global issue. Now, by the U.S. not doing that, it makes U.S. Treasuries more attractive, and with that rate spread that's been developing between the 10-year and 2-year notes, having foreign investors interested in buying U.S. Treasuries is a bonus, and that would certainly stave off that steep arc that's been really raising interest rates domestically in the U.S. quite a bit. Quite a bit of sell-off here for gold from that standpoint. It's been within this DOC spread here from the peak here, and it's just continued to escalate. We're seeing, though, that the white MBI leading up here, so the potential is that you could get a little bit of continuation within that. Of course, the 23% right there, and does it surprise us? No. Should gold be way higher? Absolutely. Do all the gold bugs say those things? They always do. But as we pointed out, there's a whole separation now in the market between this bifurcation from Russia and everything else, and so it just changes the dynamics quite a bit because a lot of the Western market is traded in paper versus the physical metal. And of course, like I've said, the Russians have not called on payment in gold. So as far as that goes, they haven't, done what I think would be more likely the nuclear option of just really blowing things up. And it seems like they're not really that interested in doing that at this particular stage. Oil softening a little bit. And again, this is going to be interesting because it becomes a question at what point is it reflexive of the economic conditions, or if it's just cutback that is causing an ease in demand enough to allow supplies to fill the void. That will certainly be an interesting question going forward, particularly if the talk was that after Macron winning that they would then move towards banning all Russian oil. That would certainly throw oil markets into who knows that state. See, that's the issue. Nobody really knows. Seems like people don't believe it. Yellen's already come out against the idea of doing such a thing to the EU, telling them it would be catastrophic for them. Much of what they've been doing here has been catastrophic for Western markets, so I don't know if they're going to listen to that one versus what they've been ignoring all along. All of the things that we've been seeing crisis-wise have been self-inflicted for the most part. But you can see there's that rise in TLT, so plenty of bid there for treasuries, helping to soften the yield just a little bit. Still potentially looks weak because of pivot lower of Magenta on there. We're going to be making new lows, and I've been talking about 115. And at that point, it starts to get really interesting because if you break below 110 in that, then it really gets precarious. We haven't seen those levels in quite some time. Very, very long time. Bitcoin, the big decline, pretty consistent there within the shakeout readings. And then it started to crossover turnaround. We saw the dip of orange below red and everything at kind of the extreme levels. I mean, I always look for anything to get minus 23 or better on the DOC red, and that usually calls for a turnaround play, and that's, I mean, we get to what, minus 24, and sure enough, that created the pop down. Whether it has enough intensity, obviously, then the first look is to the 23%, in this case, right at our key algo strike at the 39K. So above that becomes much more positive, and then you get that range that we've been seeing here between the 40 and 39. Been pretty consistent. We've had little moves above it, but every time we have, we've come right back to it. So not a lot has changed with that. It's been pretty consistent with it. ETH also, you know, it had its move, but I think much cleaner in its trade and really effective and easy to see on that one. It's something I've talked about for a while now. I really like the way Ethereum trades. Even better than Bitcoin. I mean, it's not about the amount because the percentage is still much easier to trade. 50K, well, you can see that. That's a decline that came through. We've come up for a declining 100% marker here after stabilizing, and then we started getting the rising gold, still continuing to do so, and reached the 50% mark, and it's hovered still above that right there. Still have declining 100% on that. That's going to continue to drop some more. So whichever the 100% will drop, or price will rise to it. So at this point, 43, 45 is where the 100% is at the top side. We'll see which one catches up first. I think the next level it would probably attain would be somewhere right around in this 43-28 range. So that's the race to the 100% at this particular stage. But really, I think what was interesting about the day in general, from a 5K standpoint, fine, we end up plus 25, but I think more interesting was the amount of volume, because this was a big day as far as trading. I mean, we were back and forth, a lot of weakness built into it, but, you know, every time we had reasonable turnarounds and moves above the 23%, along with that crossover on DOC, you got to respect those, because, again, even within bear markets, you're going to get some strong counter rallies, quick short covering, that kind of setup. And then when they wear out, it becomes the opportunity to take advantage of them again, and boom. Did that back and forth, but you can see there was just, it kept going and going and going. That is a lot of activity. So there was some clear activity that really interests the people, and was right around midday mark that caught a bid there, and then once it got to these highs, it just kept building on that, and there wasn't any really strong interest to drive anything lower, and just kept escalating all the way through the end of the day. And even though it got into a soft patch right there, still held up above, so that's still marginally bullish, but a little bit of a breakdown there, and we could see a little bit of a fill back. There's some positive extremes going back all the way to right in here, 42.65 range, and then the second set that was right at the lows there up in the 71. So those would be the first I would expect to see any revisiting to. But overall, it was pretty consistent, pretty even, and a little more complex with some of the mid-range. You just had to wait out a lot of it. But there was so much activity going on volume-wise that really good to see that that's much more healthy as far as the liquidity goes. And so clearly there were some big players stepping in to gobble up quite a bit. So that's worth pointing out, because that is usually the beginnings of something that can build. And everyone will say to me, of course, but look at all the negatives that exist. That really doesn't matter. Again, this is about playing against the weak side and exploiting it to the point that there's nothing left there, and then flipping back around. We're still relatively close to the highs. This is not a catastrophic move to the downside in any way, shape, or form. So we got a bunch of earnings and everything coming out as well. So there's a lot of hype and things that are going to go back and forth. I think the currency thing, along with the treasuries, though, doesn't bode well in the longer term scenarios for the second half of the year, though. So that becomes a poignant question, but I think we're going to get a lot of back and forth. There's still a lot of excess on the dark side of thinking that the market is crashing imminently, and because of that, I think that plays well into the hands of counterparties that have resources to drive things up. And it works beautifully for short covering, and that can really accelerate the market quite a bit for some time. So worth noting. So stay fluid and be flexible. As always, though, anything relevant, I will update you as needed on the Skype chat. Trade well.